Hold up. My views are my own. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. Lightning round. Dangerously close.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say if you want, you could even ask, am I pronouncing your name right? And I'm kind of a buff in history, and they said, so what kind of a name is Blehm? And I could tell you the real quick, boom, where we came from.
Yeah, where did the Blims come from?
The Blehm family, there's a lot of Blems in the US. It's not a common name with that silent H at the end, but a lot of them changed when people came to the US and immigrated from wherever. But my family, the Blehm family, originally they're German and or Austrian descent, that area, but they were farmers, and they got offered by Russia, offered them to go to the Volga River Valley in Russia. And they were kind of like sharecroppers for a number of years. Like if they worked the land and helped feed the Russian people for, I think it was 3 years or 6 years, they would then grant them the right to, I think, either have some land or they would move on to the US. So they were all German farmers who went to Russia and farmed the Volga River Valley and then immigrated to the United States way back in the late 1800s.
Hey, that's not a bad deal. Three years of farming, either grant some land or a trip to the US. I'll take it.
Something like that. I think it was. I think it was more like 6 years, but because that was their journey. That was how they made it here. Those who wanted to, and so there's Blems all over the country. And I would send a shout out if any Blems out there listening, go to www.ericblehm.com and contact me and tell me, hey, I'm another Blehm.
I was curious too when you were. I was hoping you would say the time period, because I was like, when were Germany and Russia on such good terms? Hey, but speaking of Blems, my guest today is Eric Blehm. Eric Blehm is the award-winning author of the New York Times bestsellers Fearless and The Only Thing Worth Dying For. His first book, The Last Season, was the winner of the National Outdoor Book Award and was named by Outside Magazine as one of the greatest adventure biographies ever written. What's up again, Eric?
Hey, how are you? Whoop whoop.
I was trying to use the Blehm thing as a little, like, a segue into the intro. I don't know if it worked. We'll find out.
that totally worked. I gotta say that you got, as a kid, having the last name Blehm, I mean, you could get all sorts of names and whatnot. And I mean, I didn't actually have an acne problem, but my nickname for a long time was Acne Blemish.
Yeah.
Or just Blemish and Blemmer, and just so many little derivatives of Blem.
Kids are so mean.
It's funny. Oh, they are mean little
kids are the
buggers.
meanest.
Yeah, totally. Luckily, I mean, I grew up in this. I always had a calloused back that just stuff kind of ran off me. And that kind of prepared me to be a writer, honestly.
Hell yeah.
Because some reviews can be brutal, and others are pretty dang awesome.
The thing, so just having the name Doug and growing up, the cartoon show Doug was huge. And that was like the thing that I got teased at the most, but it was like it wasn't that bad, because it was like everybody was just, because there were not a lot of Dougs. Like, I think like it's not like it's a name. Everyone knows the name Doug, but you don't know a lot of people named. My whole life, I've met like 5 Dougs. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot. And you know what it makes me think of? I'm a little bit older than you, but I grew up in the, Gen X arcade generation, and the game Dig Dug was an arcade game.
Yeah, I played that game. I was thinking about
sure.
Well, and the weirdest thing too is, as I got older and started working, no matter where I worked, my entire life, my nickname always became Dougie Fresh after the rapper. Like, just
Dougie Fresh.
I would never go any place and say, "Hey, call me this," because I don't particularly like the nickname. But
oh my god,
it happened at every job I've ever had. Just at some point, one person says it, and then it sticks.
Dude, I got this. Rapping wise, I got having the name Eric B. So I was always, yo, Eric B.
Yeah, hell yeah, dude. So, in saying the bio, I mentioned several of your books, but I didn't mention the one we're discussing today. That is The Darkest White, the story of Craig Kelly, professional snowboarder, much more than professional snowboarder, like snowboarding legend, pioneer, who died tragically in an avalanche. And you what you just when before we started recording, you said this book has kind of in development for like the past 20 years or so. But I guess I want to just start for because not everyone is into snowboarding as much as you or I might be, and maybe I've only heard his name a couple times, don't fully know. But I have heard Craig Kelly described as the most influential snowboarder of all time on multiple occasions. Like that's how people often describe him.
Yeah.
So, in your opinion and of him, and study your research, and also I have to ask, have you met him?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
he was. I consider Craig a friend. We went like the most exotic place we ever went snowboarding was Iran. We went snowboarding in the mountains outside Tehran
You were
in the
on the
Alborz
Iran.
Mountains.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I just know some of the legendary stories of Craig Kelly, and I know about the Iranian story, and I know that there were some people that didn't like you guys bringing snowboarding there. There was somebody got pissed off. Like, did you guys give a snowboard to a kid? Then like somebody
No,
shot a bullet, shot your windshield out.
no, that is I love that was just a telephone game right there. Because
Okay.
I will say that that what happened and I was on his second trip. His first trip, I will give credit to a cowboy from Durango, Colorado, who put together a trip. His name's Jack Turner, and he put together Craig's first trip to Iran, and it was the first time the Iranian group had let a recreational group of Americans for any reason into the country
Yeah.
since the Iran crisis or hostage crisis back in the 80s. So it was crazy. He got there on that trip and the snow was not that great, but he was, in the back of his mind, he was Craig Kelly, always thinking ahead, I'm going to come back. And I came with him on his second trip to Iran. And what happened, the part you said, first of all, the Iranian people were probably of all the places I've ever traveled, the most hospitable and absolutely loved Americans. It was totally, I mean, people were so nervous when I was going to go there, like, you're going to Iran? Are you shot smart? The State Department wouldn't even let me get a visa there. I had to go through the Pakistani embassy and pick up my visa for Iran in Germany. I couldn't even get it on American soil.
Oh,
And
because
so
the U.S. was like
they,
ostensibly
yeah, they said
at
it's
odds
a
with
dangerous
Iran.
place to go. Yeah, well, at odds, and just they were worried. I think there had been some kidnappings if things happen, whatever. They didn't want to, they basically put out that word. So if anything does happen, you're kind of on your own. And
Yeah.
so we went there and but the people were amazing. And they loved us. They loved snowboarding. And Craig just had said like a revolution had occurred since he had been there like 4 years earlier. There was like 5 times more snowboarders, but they were all on this ancient gear. Like we were riding the current gear of the time in 2000, and they were all riding the stuff that we were riding back in like the late 80s. And it was just crazy how for him to watch how it evolved.
Yeah.
And but what happened on one point, Craig and Tom Burt, who were two of the guys, they went down around or some we split up at one point
Yeah.
and we were split boarding, kind of searching for good places to take photos at the Dizine Mountain Resort. Well, uh, I believe it was Craig and Tom Burt, or Tom Burt and John Buffrey, actually, a guide that came with us. They went down over this ridge line and saw this great powder field and just thought, we're going to do that. And then we'll just scoot back over and bounce a little bit, side country stuff.
Yeah.
And they were going down. Then all of a sudden they saw somebody pop their head up like in white snow camouflage in the distance behind this little building. Ended up it was a military base. And they started yelling,
Oh,
whatever. And they were trying to pantomime, saying, "We'll go back to the resort." And they were trying to say, "No, you come here. Like, we want to talk to you. What are you doing here?"
yeah.
And then as they started going to the left, the shots rang out and they shot a couple warning shots at them. And they were like, holy crap. So they both got on their knees basically to stay under this rise and got back in bounds and then disappeared into the crowd at the parking lot when they got there at the bottom. And they were like,
Oh,
holy shit, we just got shot at.
that is so
And
gnarly. Okay, so
yeah,
so
it was pretty good.
I can see what you're saying. The game with telephone a little bit. I guess that story gets changed or told differently. And
Yeah.
I had heard the story that they were in the car, they took a shot and blasted out the windshield. That's like the story that I know.
Okay. That was Craig on his trip to Turkey.
Okay, never
He snowboarded in
mind.
Turkey as well. So you got the
Yeah,
wrong country, but no, that absolutely did happen. And they
yeah,
were like, "Whoa, what the hell?" Yeah, that was he had a lot of adventures. I gotta say, he lived a very full life in his short 36 years.
yeah. No, so I feel like, I mean, we kind of got a little tangent and diverged for a moment from my question, but I feel like we already started answering it. But just to finish it off, I do want to ask you this because this is just like from your personal experience, traveling with him, and then also just everything you know about him. What separates Craig Kelly from other amazing athletes in the sport? To potentially, as people often refer to him, the most influential snowboarder of all time. Like, how do you earn a title like that?
Well, you got to go back in time when snowboarding was pretty much a fairly unknown sport. I mean, I started in 1982, 83. That's when Craig started. A lot of ski areas didn't even allow it. So we were kind of finding our way at the same time that the sport was growing. And the athletes and the competitors were just doing like the company owners, Jake Burton or Tom Sims especially, would organize contests on their own,
Yeah,
and they would set up figure out a way, how are we going to judge the abilities and find champions and world champions. There was nothing, and so he came on, and he brought professionalism to the sport. He was a guy who all of a sudden said, I'm going to win this event, and by the way, I'm going to train for it, when a lot of the early half pipe riders didn't train at all. It was all natural ability, skateboarders who would come into the sport, and they had a lot of natural ability. And
yeah,
so he was a guy that all of a sudden started winning, and people started realizing, wait a minute, he's like going to bed at 10 o'clock at night while we're still like busting beer bottles over our head. And,
yeah,
he took it to that next level, really. One of his proteges and a young snowboarder who he took under his wing, named Keith Wallace. His nickname was Duck Boy, and he said that's kind of his quote that I've used many times, that he brought discipline to the sport. On top of that, he was the first person that demanded a contract and ended up getting livable wages for snowboarders.
yeah,
He also had this amazing style. Like when you watched him ride, it was like, dancing. Like, somebody once, I think it was Greg Stump, who loved to film Craig, and he said he was like Baryshnikov. I mean, on snow. He was a guy and he also he looked so fluid on the mountain, that if you ever rode like you've seen Warren Miller ski movies, or where you have two skiers or whatever riders in this case going down the mountain, you wouldn't want to be the guy teamed up with Craig, because you looked like you were falling over yourself, even if you were riding perfectly. Yet
yeah,
Craig had this fluid motion. He could find the line down the mountain. So he had all these attributes. I mean, he dropped out of engineering. Was 2 quarters shy of a degree in chemical engineering when he thought, you know what, I think I can make it as a pro snowboarder. And he quit, dropped out of school to try and make it in a sport that didn't even exist yet. And then
yeah.
he turned around and he became the first snowboarder. I mean, he was the first guy who ever built or bought a house paid for solely from money that he earned riding a snowboard. Not
Yeah.
promoting, not like the owners who were selling gear, but the first person who actually made a legitimate career out of snowboarding. He would argue that Jose Fernandez, a big guy in Europe, and Bert Lamar were right before him. And that's another thing that was great about Craig. Super humble. Like if you
Yeah.
tried to throw something out at him, he would correct you. No, actually, Andy Hetzel is the all-time mogul champion, or something like that. If someone tried to say, "Oh yeah, you were the all-time world mogul champion," and he'd
Yeah.
correct you. So he
Kind of.
always deflected stuff. So if you get a picture, that's who Craig was,
Yeah.
and he could hang with everybody. He was that kid at school who would hang with the jocks, the stoners, the surfers, and then he'd go over to the spelling bee kids and kick their ass because he was so stinking smart. So he could kind of dip his toe in many pools, and always kind of feel like the big fish in all of them.
This helps kind of explain a little bit too. Tony Hawk has a quote. It's on the cover of your book, saying that Craig Kelly was a big inspiration and stuff like that. And but kind of you describing those early days, it almost reminds me, like it almost mirrors a little bit the transition period between like dog and skateboarding. So skateboarding
Oh,
is my main
Dogtown.
is my main sport. Snowboarding is something that I love, but it's not, I don't live in a place that has mountains. So the Dogtown era, but then when people like Tony Alva and Tony Hawk like
Mhm.
started creating careers out of it. That
Right.
that really does mirror to me what you're saying about Craig Kelly being like, this is not we're not just out here to goof off. Like I'm going to take this to a professional, to an elite athletic level. And that's, I guess, where he also kind of earned that the Michael Jordan of snowboarding title.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. I actually, you brought up skateboarding, and I actually have a clip of an old interview when a reporter asked that exact same question, and his response is so amazing and humble because he loves skateboarding, but he wasn't. And you got to imagine this is a kid. Well, he's probably like 20 at this point, maybe 21.
Yeah.
Um, no, actually, he would have been, I think, yeah, 20 or 21. And a reporter in like a press conference after he had just won a contest is sitting there and asked him, it's a lot like skateboarding. Does skateboarding influence how you ride, or you must be a big skateboarder? And he basically explains it in a way where he deflects all of it and admits, no, I'm not really a skateboarder. And you just said something at the very end of that when you finished that
Well, I was
last
saying that
note.
he was mirroring the beginning of the professional skateboarding era with people
Right.
like Alva, Tony Hawk, like Stacy Peralta, like you know,
Yes.
all those like really really early names. Because before those guys, people weren't really making money. They weren't buying houses from skateboarding. That was kind of pioneered by more of that group of guys. I might be talking a little bit out of school. There might have I don't I'm not exactly familiar with who was the first person who really made a good living with skateboarding, but it sounds to me like Craig Kelly really was the first person to like be like, no, I'm taking this seriously. Here's my contract.
Hmm.
I'm earning you this money. Pay me what I'm worth. And that's I admire that, and I think it's very cool. And I think that also, in so many ways, I mean, that answers the question: how is he the most influential snowboarder of all time? He's the one that made it a profession. A profession.
Yeah, he did. He brought professionalism to the sport. Absolutely. I mean, and again, he rode for Sims Snowboards at first, which was like the cool West Coast company that had all the skaters and the surfers and were really good at freestyle, which in that era, freestyle meant you rode the half pipe, which wasn't really a half pipe compared to what you see in the Olympics now. It was like a ditch that, the competitors would show up with their own shovels and help shape the half pipe themselves 2 days before the contest. So you didn't show up early for a contest to practice.
Yeah,
You showed up to build your own stinking half pipe. I
yeah,
mean, that's it's very classic. So you get some of this history. I weaved the early history of snowboarding with Craig's fingerprint throughout it. So it's kind of the book itself is kind of a history of snowboarding, a biography, and then because Craig was killed tragically at the in 2003 by an avalanche, it was very controversial also. He died with 6 other people in the
yeah,
Selkirks of British Columbia. So, it's a full gamut story. It's really 3 different stories, and I just tried to meld it and put it into one. But what I was saying was he wrote for Sims first, and then he wasn't too happy. I mean, with how he was being treated, he wasn't getting paid. His expenses weren't getting reimbursed quickly, and he ended up jumping ship, thinking that his contract ended, and that's when Burton Snowboards picked him up, and that's where he really got. I think that's how the name, the Michael Jordan, really comes together for Craig because he really made that put Burton on the map in the
yeah,
freestyle arena. And basically, I mean, his first pro model board, and for the listeners who don't know, like skateboarders oftentimes will have their name, like the Tony Hawk model skateboard would, he gets, a few bucks for every board sold. They did the same thing with snowboarding. So the board that they made for Craig was called the Craig Kelly Air.
yeah,
Well, the Air, think of Michael Jordan Air.
yeah.
And
Yeah, it's all time
and
because it's making me think about
yeah.
too, like because they're contemporaries. Michael Jordan was the Michael Jordan of basketball, while Craig Kelly was the Craig Kelly of
the,
snowboarding. And
he was.
but it does it makes me think too, like just those endorsement deals. A lot of that stuff previously it existed, but it wasn't like Michael Jordan. I'm not entirely sure how all of that shook out for him with the Air Jordans. But I mean,
Mhm.
what a business move just to be like, oh, because like who cares what the Chicago Bulls are paying him? Nike is Like that, like
Yeah.
every time they sell one pair of shoes, that's just another like cha-ching.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some interesting parallels with Craig and Nike, in that when he tried to leave Sims and then they wouldn't didn't want to let him go, and they put a restraining order on him that he could not ride Burton snowboards until we figure this out in court.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
he was forced to ride a board without graphics for more than a year, and be like this mystery rider. And so a lot of people would say, actually, Craig's dad, when I interviewed him, he said, a lot of people thought that snowboarding would become legitimate and, everybody would take notice when it makes it into the Olympics. And he's all, no, that's not the case. When it got legitimate, or what makes it legitimate is a big stinking corporate lawsuit. And because everybody was all of a sudden, all the kids wanted contracts. And
Yeah.
as well, it got a lot of coverage, and that I cover the court case in there as well. But to be able to look at the transcripts of these two companies battling over this one rider who just wants to go snowboarding. That's all he
Yeah.
wanted to do.
And
And it's,
proving that fact so succinctly and perfectly by being like, all right, if I can't be sponsored, even though I am the most elite person in this sport, I'm gonna still be out there every single day on a board with no graphics,
yeah.
because this is what I love, and you're not gonna stop me with some corporate
Yeah.
bullshit.
Well, and Sims, the guy, Brad Dorfman was the owner and founder of Vision Streetwear and Vision Sports and Vision Skateboards.
Yeah.
And he became the sole owner of the license for Sim snowboards. So he went after Craig and Burton with a $4 million at the time lawsuit.
Whoa.
And so
Whoa.
so Craig ended up having to pay out of pocket. Burton completely supported him. It was like, well, I will just say, uh, do you allow cuss words in this?
Fuck yeah, man. Say whatever the fuck you want.
Okay, all right. I'm just letting you know. All you children out there, put the earmuffs on. Um, his Craig's girlfriend at the time, Kelly Jo Legaz, was explained that moment, and she said that moment in history was basically like a John Grisham thriller meets snowboarding clusterfuck. And that was kind of that era of this lawsuit where he was getting, he had this lawsuit hanging over his head. And I won't say what happens with it, but it's interesting that the same exact attorney that oversaw his the case when they made him ride this black bottom board was the same judge. I think it's Burns, but he was the same judge that Phil McKnight had to go against when a company in wherever it was that was making his shoes. Was it China originally from the start, or was it Japan? I think it was Japan. It was yeah,
So you're talking about like that's the CEO of Nike, right?
yeah. The CEO
Okay.
of Nike ended up having a lawsuit against him when he tried to take his brand off away from this company. It was called, well, his original name was called Blue Ribbon Sports. And anyways, he ended up going to court, and really the future of Nike didn't even exist yet.
Yeah.
He was trying to get the name to make, and then he was going to go forward with Nike, and this huge conglomerate in Japan was suing him, and he sat before the same exact judge that Craig sat before, about 8 years later, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
and
crazy
and
how
then really,
all these like these lines of all, these things all tangle together, just
yeah.
the irony
And
that
and some, I mean, a lot of it's cool to get out, some of these stories out in a podcast with people like you, because I couldn't fit it all in the book. I don't think I had that little bit of tidbit of info about having the same judge. It would have taken a paragraph to develop that and explain Phil McKnight and what was going on, and
yeah.
space was limited. It always is in a book, so
And
it's
you've
cool.
got
But
a flow, I assume, like, you're in the middle of a story. It's like a river, you got to keep going. You can't stop in every
yeah,
whirlpool that comes along the way. You're
yes.
like, hey, this is a great anecdote, but this is not going to fit in the book. Like,
Right, exactly. And to your question earlier, I mean, about this really is a book for everybody. And I know I sound like I'm selling my book, but I know certain books are for certain readership. This book really is for everybody. I think even Tony Hawk says it on his, and he was one of the first people to read it, because he knew Craig Kelly as the guy that everybody looked up to in snowboarding, and he could also surf. He ripped at surfing, and so Tony Hawk says, I'm not sure exactly, but he basically said this is a story of for everybody. If you like unlikely heroes
yes,
who
yeah. I,
rise above their situation. So Craig was also a latchkey kid. His parents had been divorced. He had to pay for half of his first BMX bike because his parents couldn't afford it. All these little things are really cool. But coming back to the future here, where we are now, what made me write the book and kind of full circle to your question was, gosh, I can't help but use Michael Jordan, but I was in a lift line to get on a chairlift at a ski area, and I had on the nose of my board a sticker that we all put on our boards and went around the world when Craig died, and it was Craig Kelly as my co-pilot. And
Oh,
I had
cool.
this sticker on my board, and this kid in the lift line next to me looks down and just, with all sincerity, says, "Who's Craig Kelly?" And this is like a 20-something-year-old snowboarder. He's
Oh,
got all the gear. He looks like somebody who should know. And I went like, oh my God, Craig's being forgotten.
yeah,
And that was what really made me want to write the book. And what I tell people who don't quite understand how big he was to me in the modern era, imagine you are going to do a pickup basketball game at any basketball court in the world. And but let's say you're in America,
yeah,
and you show up wearing a Michael Jordan t-shirt or that says Michael Jordan on your or the jersey, and somebody at the court sitting there looks over at you and says, "Who's Michael Jordan?" I mean,
yeah,
that is literally how big Craig was to all of us. And this kid had never heard of him. And so if you can imagine having that, and everybody knows who Michael Jordan is,
yeah,
uh, that's what it was like to me. And that's what made me decide, hey, I want to tell this story. I want to tell Craig's story, introduce him to a new generation and like cement his legacy into the annals of mountaineering history, and just, honor him because he did a
yeah.
lot for a lot of us. He gave a lot of people a path in life, and I was one of them.
Actually, I want to go back just a moment to not that specific quote when you talked about the reporter,
Hmm.
but how he's described as one of the most influential snowboarders of all time. You could say that, but you could also 100%. I think it's fair to say he's one of the most quotable snowboarders of all time. He's got a philosophy, or from what I've quotes I've heard him say, like in snowboard videos and
Yeah.
interviews. He's like I'm trying to, like, off the top of my head, it's so hard to think of one, but there's one that's something where he's like, yeah, man, it's actually like, people think that I'm achieving my goals, but actually what I did is I got rid of all my goals and I'm just following my path. Things like that, stuff that,
Yeah.
like, it's like
Yeah.
almost like you would think like a Buddhist monk that's like had meditated for years would come, he just seems like a regular guy, but he's got his head on
Yeah.
straight. And what I want to ask you is, if you can maybe explain a little bit, like, what was Greg's like philosophy, like, because it seems like he had kind of a life philosophy that really guided him and kind of led him to be such a kind of a memorable figure.
I think it's safe to say that Craig's philosophy was nurtured over time and evolved over time. Because at first he was just this very serious and very competitive, BMX racer, to become a very serious and competitive snowboard racer, freestyler, whatever. And so and he was very cerebral. He studied, he read books, he'd read biographies of other athletes, and to learn uh, their own training regimens, and then mold his own. But ultimately he realized that stress and everything of competing was taken away from what originally drew him to snowboarding. And
Yeah,
that was just hiking up the mountain and riding the powder down, riding the natural terrain. Free riding is kind of like, he didn't coin the phrase, but he epitomized it. And what he ultimately did, and I'm trying to remember who it is who came up with the term, but follow your bliss became Craig's
yeah,
mantra in life. And if you follow your bliss, you're going to meet people along the way who are there with you, who are like-minded, whatever it is. And so his mantra really was that. He, when he disappeared, he dropped off the map eventually. Like, he left all the fame and fortune behind, and he said, "I'm just going to free ride." And at that point, he was, again, he wasn't reclusive, but he dropped off the public map. I was the editor of Transworld Snowboarding magazine. That was my first job in journalism, and that's how I was able to meet Craig.
Yeah.
Originally, I wanted to be a pro snowboarder myself. When I decided, nope, I'm not Craig Kelly.
Yeah.
I went back to journalism school. There's a whole story to how I came to writing and how I met Craig. But at the end of the day, it was this, follow your bliss was who he was, and he became what I call him in the book. Is that he was the Obi-Wan Kenobi of snowboarding. He was that wise elder, not that old, but he had that persona and that aura of this just relaxed, very calm, very thoughtful individual. And if you were with him, I gotta say, you'd be in a gnarly situation. You felt safe with Craig. You
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. And honestly, that really leads me into one of the next things I wanted to ask, because we started out at the very beginning. We talked about a couple of kind of wild stories. I mean, uh, being in Iran, accidentally getting a little too close to a military base because they thought they saw a spot. They were like, "Oh, we could do a run on this spot, and no
Yeah.
one will know. We'll get away." And then of course the story you said in Turkey where someone took a shot at him and put the windshield out. Um, but like you said, just kind of the Obi-Wan Kenobi-ness of him, his probably I assume like sense of calm, maybe even
Hmm.
like a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
So it would make, I'm sure that the people that traveled with him, like he sounds like to me, and you would have firsthand experience with this. He sounds like to me to be one of those people that just kind of feels like when you're with them, you're like, this feels like we're doing the right thing. Like if they seem to have
Yeah.
almost an inner compass of which like where the adventure ahead is, and like maybe it seems like it's going to be especially some of the backcountry stuff. Like it seems it's not doesn't just seem, it is dangerous. But
Yeah.
would you maybe like could you maybe share like a couple of your like favorite stories like of kind of some of his adventures? Because
Wow.
I mean, I know that's a lot. Like, there's a huge question, but just I know, and just what I'm saying. Just anything that might pop into your mind is something that you fondly remember as a cool story of his.
Well, I got to watching him ride powder was a treat, and to be able to even on film, but to watch him in person or get to follow him was even more amazing. So I went catboarding, which people don't know what that is. It's like the tractors that groom the runs at resorts. You see them making the cat tracks and whatnot. Those snowcats are used also just like helicopters to get people up the mountain in some areas, and then you get to ride the fresh powder between. So these cat tracks create roads that kind of zigzag up the mountain, and then there's huge swaths of forest and gullies or whatever terrain they have between them. And usually when you're at a catboarding operation, they team you up with somebody like at the top. The guide will say, okay, everybody's got a buddy, and then you go down. Well, I got to follow Craig down this amazing tree run. And to me, it was kind of like being in a video game. I didn't, normally in powder, especially deep powder, you want to find your own fresh tracks. But I found myself, I mean, it was amazingly deep powder, but I found myself actually just kind of staying in his track because he found the perfect line.
Yeah,
And it was still crazy soft, like the snow was filling in behind you. So I'm following down this amazing tree run, like through these glades and everything. And then we hit at the very bottom the cat track, which is like it's kind of like going from imagine you're in a dream floating and flying through clouds, and then all of a sudden you hit blacktop. It was like
yeah,
boom, boom. We hit this hard thing. It was barely angled, but Craig just loved to snowboard so much, and it didn't matter whatever he was up against, whatever he was riding, he would just milk it for everything it was worth. And so we hit this cat track, and we are at the rally point for the cat that's going to pick us up is down, this cat track quite a while, maybe a couple hundred yards, a couple football fields. And so it's pretty flat, and I'm just following him down this cat track. And then all of a sudden on the right side, the cat track or the snowcat's blade had kind of made like almost a wave that came over up on the side. And so we're basically riding down the road covered with snow. And he just drops under there and he kind of casually drags his hand along the face, and he looks like he's surfing the snow. And he starts just picking up speed. And he had this ability to pump the terrain, which is why he was so good at racing and create speed out of nothing. Like every turn, he'd get like a few feet farther ahead of me. And as we got closer, farther down, it just gets more speed, and he's starting to do these like big sweeping turns that I'm following on this groomed cat track. And far in the distance, you see this mother of all snow waves, like 15 feet up the slide of the hill on the right side, which is for him, he's a regular foot, he's left foot forward. It's a front side wave. And he does this huge bottom turn and shoots all the way up this like impossible near vertical like wall of snow, and there's a cornice at the top, and he just lays his body back, pushes the tail of the board through, and just explodes the whole top of this cornice in just this powder cloud. He completely disappears. It's a huge powder cloud, like he made the whole road fogged out from this powder that just blew over from him. And at this point I'm like 40 yards behind him because I haven't been able to keep up.
Yeah.
And so I see this whole thing about, and then he just like shoots through the powder, shakes off his head casually, just like a surfer does when they pull out of a tube,
Yeah.
and this keeps going. And I just was like, oh my God, that is Craig Kelly right there.
Yeah.
He just loved to snowboard. He could milk terrain like nobody else, and he could do things. He could levitate down the mountain. It was just, and then, I part in the book when I explained who he was, he was a superhero to us. He was born from a blizzard on a sleeping volcano. He was a guy who would, he would air cliffs and land on the covers of magazines. I mean, he just was amazing to all of us. And that's one of my favorite personal anecdotes of him. There's a lot of other ones. One of the funniest probably is when he had a buddy that he would ride with, a little kid to him, not a little kid, but probably 7 years younger. And name was Mike Rankwit. And at one point he racked him to the roof of his car and took off driving. Like they saw a picture in a magazine of somebody on skis on a roof rack, and like to act like they're in a speed tunnel. Well, they saw this and said, "Hey, Mikey, get up on the car and strap into your snowboard." Well, he did that. He was strapped into his boots on top of the car, strapped into the roof racks. And then Craig just took off and started driving. And he drove down the road with him and pulled into like a taco stand or a Jack in the Box or something and was ordering. And that's when the cops pulled up and somebody had told him
Oh yeah.
what was going on.
It's hard to get away with shit like that for very long.
It was so total prankster. And this cop ended up being really cool. Like Craig was very polite. "Hello, sir. I'm very sorry about this. We were just having a little fun with my whatever." And he just said, "How old are you, kid?" to Mike. And he actually lied. I think he said, I'm 12 years old or something, when he was really like 17 or something.
Yeah.
And he said, "I don't know what the hell I'm going to do, but let me think about this." And the cop walked away and he came back a few minutes later. He said, "Listen, I am going to say that I'm going to give you a ticket for endangering the life of a minor."
Oh,
and
shit.
when the judge sees that, he's going to think that he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. But that's the ticket I'm going to give you.
Okay.
So Craig, again, that's the Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's like, these are not the droids you're looking for. Like he talks nicely to the cop, and the cop gives him this very kind thing because he was polite and respectful. But inside, he loved the art of the prank. He was a full-on prankster, loved that stuff. And anyways, two great stories right there.
Yeah.
That kind of show two different sides of Craig. His prankster side, his middle name's Elmer, Craig Elmer Kelly. And his buddies over time, they thought that whenever Craig went wild and, went bad, so to speak, that was when Elmer took over. So anytime something weird happened, you'd reach into your pocket in the morning about ready to get on the lift and you found a pocket full of warm oatmeal. That was Elmer.
No. It's funny too. Like I just thinking about what you said, the story of following him down the track. Like I've obviously I don't think I've ever been in the presence of a legend of that caliber, but I know what you mean. So like, when you watch someone like that, like where it's like it's like the earth speaks to them, gravity works with them, like the wind works with them. And I'm like, for instance, for me, I've been in the presence of like some pretty amazing professional skateboarders, and watch them skate, and it's like it's almost like the ground, it's almost like they are a part of it. They're when they do things that don't seem humanly possible. So when you're telling that story, I have my own like kind of very different, but like I get the idea, the feeling of watching someone at the absolute like peak of their game doing things that don't seem humanly possible.
Yeah,
but
no, totally.
I guess also just to get like a little bit more into like the idea of what. So this is something too that I think I'm not sure when he first started doing more backcountry type stuff. And you said like after a while he kind of walked away from like the fame and fortune of the big events and started doing more backcountry snowboarding. Could you explain like a little bit about what backcountry snowboarding is? Because it doesn't sound safe. It does sound fun, but it sounds like you're taking a risk. So how would you
Yeah,
describe it as someone that's
I
done
would
it?
describe, yeah, for backcountry, I mean, really, you have ski resorts that are controlled, the steeper runs at a resort, there's ski patrol and avalanche technicians that are predicting the snow's ability to stay on the slope or to slide down in an avalanche. And so when you're at a resort, hazards are marked everywhere, especially in America, but
Yeah,
most places, okay, there's a cliff there. There's a cross
yeah,
chunk of bamboo and a sign that says cliff or things like that. In the backcountry, it's all natural. It's wind sculpted waves, not groomers that groom something, or a park. Today, kids out there building the park features and the rails and the quarter pipes and the hips and whatever. It's 100% made by nature, and the snow is wild and it is not controlled. And I think it's the difference between like tame snow, let's say, and not tame terrain necessarily, but tame snow. And also just that natural beauty. And the idea with backcountry snowboarding is it is an earn your turns um, endeavor. It is tough. You to hike up, usually you're at altitude if it's snow. It's also, you sink down deep into the snow if you don't have snowshoes or ultimately a split board, which is like when you can split your board down the center and switch the bindings over with these very ingenious little clips, and you can actually put your snowboard into two skis and you're touring up like the Nordic ski fashion with climbing skins. So you
well,
can
that's fun.
slide forward, but you don't
I've never heard
slide
that.
backwards. You've never
That
heard of a split board. Okay, well, you got to look it up. And you
that's a
can
genius
maybe,
invention. So like when you
it
like
is.
if you need to stop and walk, you can split your board and basically create snowshoes or
Yeah,
backcountry skis, I guess.
exactly.
Cross
But then
country
you
skis.
also with the snowshoes, you're still gonna punch through pretty deep. You're gonna stay, if let's say you only had your boots, let's say you would punch down all the way to your thighs. You put snowshoes on and you're only punching down to maybe your knees in
Yeah,
deeper snow, or your shins. But you put on skis and walk with those, and you're only sinking down maybe 6 inches because you have that whole mass area. It's just like someone walking on a frozen ice pond.
yeah,
You don't want to you jump on it, but if you lay down, it will support you, and that's what these enable you to do. So you have the right equipment. You have a transceiver. You've learned how to use a transceiver, which is something that beeps, so to speak, very in simple terms. It emits a signal, and if you are lost, you can then just like find my iPhone, you can turn it on to receive, and then you can look for the person who might be buried under the snow in an avalanche. So you learn how to use these,
yeah,
and then you learn, terrain that is more apt to avalanche or not. But it's you hiking up the mountain, so you're exposed from whatever's above you all the time. So you have to pick a good route,
yeah,
usually like a ridge line. If you're on a ridge line and it avalanches, the snow's going to go down the ridge line, and you're above that. But
yeah,
if you hike at the bottom of a bowl or the bottom of a gully and the sides of that gully avalanche, they're then going to pile down, slide down, and you're buried, a 5 inch deep avalanche on the sides of a big gully will become 8 feet deep snow at the bottom of that gully. And if you're at the bottom of that 8 feet, you're
yeah.
not, you can only hold your breath for so long. So they teach you how to, in the avalanche courses, how to choose the right terrain, how to use these transceivers, how to, expose fewer people to the dangerous areas when you cross over dangerous terrain. It's a whole new thing. It's like teaching yourself how to walk all over again, because you're just you kind of look at it like the mountain's out to get you at that point, and you
Yeah.
learn how to avoid that. You avoid how to avoid the dragons while you work your way up the mountain. And then once you're on top, you get to ride down. You're still potentially, it's dangerous potentially to ride down. But if you're on your board or your skis, you're more apt to maneuver away from the path of an avalanche. So in a
Isn't there
nutshell,
there
a
is like
very
a
big nutshell, that's what backcountry is. But it's so alluring because it's that calm of nature. It's silent. It's that
yeah,
pristine sheet of snow, a blank canvas for you to do whatever you want. And Craig loved it because you could look at a blank slate of snow on an untracked mountain and pick your line and you're like, you are the artist, and you can look back and look at your tracks, and it shows you, you know, your masterpiece. It's like paintbrush strokes on the mountain. It's beautiful. And if you do it right, like Craig, he will find the funnest line that will take you down the mountain. And
Yeah.
that's Craig.
You know,
Again, the
when you put it
maestro.
like that too, it it's it does sound not only does it sound obviously dangerous, you clearly probably want to go with a crew of people that you respect and think are competent people, because things can go wrong. But
Right.
but it also sounds just like extraordinarily challenging, because you don't have a ski lift. Nobody's nothing's going to carry you to the top. Like, you got to get up there yourself somehow. Unless, I guess, unless you're helicoptered in. I know you guys have
Yeah.
done
It's
some of
it's it's
that.
hard work. I mean, you can't access that beautiful backcountry. You can definitely, so, and that terrain, that beautiful backcountry terrain, you can access it with a helicopter also, or a snowcat, or snowmobiles. There's lots of ways you can access it.
Yeah.
But when you do it yourself, it's Craig would even say it's more rewarding. In one interview, Craig was asked, if you could have one run on a mountain, how would you get to the top? And he said, I would climb it, because it's going to be just so much sweeter. The turns are so much sweeter when you've sweated your ass off getting to the top. And it's hard work. It's hard work, but there's something to be said for hard work, right? You
Yeah.
feel accomplishment on
Yeah.
top of,
And
and the reward
like you
is
said, he
sweeter.
was a mountaineer in addition to being a snowboarder.
Yeah,
I want to ask you about just your own personal experience, because
right.
you have personally witnessed avalanches yourself, and
Yeah.
I want to know, what is that experience like?
It's very fast, and I haven't only witnessed one. I've been in a couple of avalanches. Only one that was just more of a powder. Like, I ended up go airing something in a steep gully, and I landed so deep that I couldn't keep moving, and all the snow above me came down and covered me
Oh,
all the way
shit.
up to my head.
Yeah.
And so my head was out, and so that was one time. But the scariest for me was in Cortina, Italy, in the Dolomites, and a couple of guys, Tom Burt and Brian Savard, were snowboarding down. They were being filmed by an amazing cinematographer named Tom Day, who was an early poster boy for Warren Miller, the skier, and then he transitioned into filming. And Eric Berger, who was a Whistler photographer, and Victoria Jalouse was there as well, who she was kind of the big mountain, one of just a few, with Morgan Lafante and Victoria Jalouse. I'm throwing out names here that a lot of your readers won't even know, but they just deserve the respect and the call out.
Oh, hell yeah.
But they were amazing riders, and I got to go to, Europe for the first time and rode with these guys. And so we had spied this one, like, kind of a little bowl that was kind of an hourglass, if you can imagine. And in the hourglass, there was a little tiny ribbon of snow that you could get through that then open up into another bowl. So it was kind of like an hourglass bowl or an hourglass couloir. And they came in from the top, and I was behind them. They were going to get their first tracks, and everybody else set up way far down the mountain, and they were set up with the cameras, and they had the radio, and we always count down 3, 2, 1, dropping, and they did a doubles where they basically did figure eights or whatever down their line, and I'm like, I'm gonna go next, so I'm up waiting where I can just see where they kind of roll over into this run, and as they disappear, they're going, and then all of a sudden you hear these hoots going, like, down the thing, like, woo, and like yelling, and it's echoing off the rocks, and I'm thinking, okay. And so I just waited and waited, and it got all quiet. I'm like, okay, they're done. Okay, so it's my turn. For me, that's the beauty of being the rider on these trips. Now you get to ride this. I do it so I can see the world on someone else's dime and ride powder. And
Yeah.
so I didn't have the radio, and I kept on, and I heard them yelling, and I thought they were saying go, but they were saying no or don't go, something. I
Yeah.
misunderstood. It was just in the far distance. So I drop in, go over that one little roll, and I drop off like a 3 foot high, probably 2.5 foot wide high shelf. Basically, when they went, that whole slope avalanched, and 2.5 feet of snow went down the mountain to where they were. So I'm riding on rock hard, the frozen bed surface of this avalanche, and all the snow above me is on this, like, shelf, basically.
Yeah.
And as I go, it's too late. I'm in the slope. I got to
Yeah.
go down. and it's icy and it's fast. And then all of a sudden, that whole amount of snow above me just starts breaking up all around me and avalanching. And it was so fast, I can't even tell you. I glanced down to where I saw this hourglass before. The throat of the hourglass was probably before about 8 feet wide. And so I was like, that's where I'm going to go. And I looked down at that spot and all I see is bare rock. It's just, it took it all the way down to the rock.
Oh
And
shit.
it's just a boulder field, literally. And this snow hits me from behind. This is all happening within like a split second. And
Yeah,
it
so
hits me
fast.
almost like I'm sitting on a chairlift. Like it hits me at the hips and or at the back of the knees on the board. Or actually I'm facing it. So it hit me in the knees and I'm like, oh crap. And you just go on autopilot. And all this snow around me is breaking up. I'm going full speed ahead down towards this rock pile. And then the powder cloud just engulfed me and I couldn't even see anything. And I'm going and I start to feel, I feel the snow like on the bottom of my board. And at that point, I just kind of pulled my board into a wheelie, like to ollie almost, thinking I'm going to get, at least the board is going to hit the rocks, not
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm just airborne and I'm going off this. And that little drop was like about a, probably like a 10-foot, 15-foot little cliff. The day before had been all snow.
Yeah.
And so I ended
And
up
that probably,
just
I know a drop like that feels like a lifetime. Like
yeah, especially when you can't see, you're
yeah.
blind, you're in a powder cloud.
Yeah.
And so I felt this, and then it was almost just like feather pillows. Like after that initial clunk, 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 I went down with the flow of it all and landed. I'm like, I'm just riding down POW. I must have made it over that cliff. How the
Yeah.
hell did that happen? And my heart's beating and I turn left, hard left, and I shoot over and I see this whole avalanche just barrel down past me and my
Holy
heart's beating, my
shit.
hands, and I ride down to the bottom of the lift, and the guys are all there with the camera. And they're all, "Good job, Blehm." He said, "You pulled that off well." And there was the ski
Whoa.
patrol was there actually at that point, and they were really big at that point. But we had the language barrier. They were saying, "Stay on the piste, the piste, or the piste is the runs, the controlled runs." And they were
Yeah.
like, only solo
Yeah.
piece, like only stay on the pole. And I'm putting my hands up. I'm like, got me. I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah.
And
Got all my
so
avalanche out of my system for the day.
yeah,
That is one
yeah.
of the
So yeah, so it was
luckiest
so fast.
avalanche stories I've ever.
Well, it was, I mean, it's funny because actually Eric Berger took a sequence of it and I have photos of this. And when you look at it, like it's from a distance and looking up a mountain, it doesn't look as steep. It looks tiny. It's not like one of these huge barreling, Waimea Bay shore breaks. It was
Yeah.
just in the moment. That's kind of my point. It was terrifying and it was fast and there was nothing you could do. It
Yeah.
had you and you're going to go wherever it wants to take you. And
Yeah.
that's what an avalanche does, for you have to know what's below you, what's beyond you. And our mistake was, we looked at this run as though it had all the snow on it. So when I looked at it from the bottom before we climbed up there, it looked beautiful, but somehow that miscommunication. So it was a great lesson also, like, okay, we're going to have some sort of a signal. If you don't want to go, it's like 2 whistles or whatever it is. But again, I was just the writer following the pros, wanting to get some fresh powder.
Yeah. Yeah. For
And
sure, man.
yeah, it was pretty cool. So that's one example of an avalanche. But other people, I know several riders who I've interviewed and met and have found they've died over the years. And Craig really wanted to learn how to be safer in the mountains, and ultimately, we can kind of shift towards that because we're
Oh
probably
yeah.
getting
Oh yeah. That's my
um,
next stuff coming up.
yeah, I was gonna say that yeah, go ahead, you can lead into the avalanche and what he did next.
Oh yeah. Do you mind if I share just like one quick anecdote, because this is just kind of like just to
Of
like
course, this is your
to
show. You can share 5 anecdotes.
well, I just want to just to buttress what you said, like like the feeling of like what you were in, which is an actual avalanche while flying down a mountain. I was snowboarding, like I'm gonna say 6-7 years ago, and I'm not good. Uh, and I think I went a little bit out of bounds, and I landed in a snowbank. I plopped. It plopped
Hmm.
ass first into a snowbank, and so there was nothing sticking out but my head and my snowboard, and I think maybe my gloves were out, but I was just stuck in it, like, and
Yeah.
wiggling, doing, couldn't do shit. And the thing is, like, I was safe because I was on a slope. There were people knew I was stuck in the snowbank. there were park rangers, like someone could eventually come get me if I couldn't get myself out. And it took me a long time. I think it took maybe it seemed like, I mean, I was drenched in sweat by the time I got out, but
Oh yeah,
I
it's hard
I
to get out
uh
of that.
I started to panic after, because
Hmm.
it's so crazy to be immobilized like that in the snow. Your only thing's out to your head. Just such,
Yeah.
so I mean, and I bring that up because that is such a minor, just kind of bullshit thing that could just happen to anybody. I mean, like that was in a completely safe environment, and even to me, like after a few minutes in there, I started like it's not like not logic that takes over. It's like your amygdala is like, this is what kills you. Like this is how
Yeah.
so
I
uh
agree. No, and I got a similar situation when I went off this cliff and kind of landed in this deep powder, and then I'm okay, but then all that snow starts coming on, and it's a powder day, it's dry snow, and it just starts piling in on you. Same thing. I couldn't move. I did get myself out, but I just slowly wiggled. Luckily, I was on a steep enough slope, and the snow was light enough that it wasn't like concrete that you
yeah,
get out of it. But panic sets in quick, and that is a killer. And it's really, in an avalanche situation, you only have a very short amount of time that there's any oxygen in the snow, and then you start rebreathing your own carbon dioxide,
yeah,
and or ice muzzle freezes over from your warm breath, and it becomes a solid sheet like muzzle of snow that you can't breathe through.
yeah,
And so that's why time is of the essence. And Craig was learning all these things towards the latter part of his career when he was kind of transitioning from that competitor. Then he became the free rider, and then he decided, it's time for me to share the mountain with people. He
yeah,
became a father. And when he
yeah,
became a father, that's when he realized, there is joy in sharing. He'd always been pretty selfish with his time. He would say it, he admitted it himself many times. It was all about me and my writing. And then being a parent, he realized how awesome it is to share the mountain. And so he endeavored to become a mountain guide, which there's no better avocation for somebody who is a lifelong learner like he was, and very cerebral because there's so much going on.
yeah.
It's snow science, it's route finding, it's history, it's you have to be a people person, all these things. And he was on the road to become what I think would have been a stellar guide.
And like you had said, Craig took his final snowboarding trip up in Canada in 2003. Uh, was there any indication that this would be any more dangerous than any other snowboarding trip he had done previously?
Well, he was actually in training, and he went on what's called in Canada, they call them a practicum. We would call it an apprenticeship, for a week at a backcountry spot, and with a very renowned guide who Craig had done his research on, and he was, renowned by, some people. He was very much a hard ass compared to some people. He was a Swiss mountain guide. His name is Rudy Beglinger, but then he was also known though as a great teacher of how to maneuver through the mountains and travel through the mountains. His tenure was basically what they use the name for the land that they basically lease from the government in Canada, and use it for whatever reason, whatever they apply for a permit, and they get a huge chunk of land. And Rudy Beglinger's Selkirk Mountain Experience tenure had glaciers, it had ice falls, it has amazing forests, open bowls, you name it. They had a very very mixed terrain. And so that's one of the reasons Craig was drawn to that, and recommended to go there by some. And other people didn't like Rudy Beglinger. So there's always he was very polarizing. Some people really loved Rudy, and some people hated him and would never go back and ski with him, because he just ran a very unique business and experience that really catered towards fit individuals who like to ski steeper terrain.
Yeah.
And he provided a great service for that. But, eventually, nature always wins. And after many years, 18 years of no incidents, this occurred. And what happened to Craig. And, I won't go super deep into it, but
Yeah.
it's imagine very trained, like at least four very trained individuals, and another 20 very very adept backcountry skiers and or snowboarders got into a situation where all of a sudden, 7 of them were on top of the snow on this run, and they were looking down at the bottom, and the whole mountain had pulled out, and they were gone. 13 people were erased from the earth,
Yeah.
and they know there's just minutes to go. And one of the survivors on top looked down at this mess that they'd gotten themselves into, and he just said the first thing he said was in his own mind was, "We're not going to have it. We're not going to get them all.
Yeah.
People are going to die today." And I recreate that entire avalanche to show everything from the snow fall, from the very first snowflakes that winter, to build up the snowpack, to understand the snow science of how you try and predict avalanches, as well as these amazing skiers and snowboarders who all end up, some of them were not very well trained at all in that, and they're set in this heroic situation where we have to dig people out and try and save some lives. And that's kind of the end of the book, built up with Craig's whole story and then their investigation and all that. So I do a real deep dive into finally telling the full story that was never told. And a lot of stuff came to light for me by interviewing all of the survivors, and just really, being patient and trying to get the backstory of everything. Because they always say in avalanche, there's multiple mistakes happen before they occur when there's a death. And there's also just the human factor. There's always things, personalities, things that are evolving to make a situation more dangerous and or precarious. And I recreate all those things in hopes that people will learn. This many years later, Craig would have wanted that. The engineer in him would have dissected, reconstructed this whole avalanche so other people could learn.
Yeah.
And that's what you get.
So I know we're running short on time. Also, I have a hard out soon because I have to go get my kid in 5 minutes.
Okay.
But
Sure.
but before that, I mean, obviously we need to save some for the book. So I mean, I don't want to ask too much, but I do just a couple of things, and we could just lightly touch on them, not have to go into a deep dive. But
Yeah.
so what it's been said that there's controversy
Mhm.
over this avalanche. And I mean, what does that mean? It's it's a natural disaster, or that's how I understand avalanches. Like, how could that be controversial?
Well, there's certain best practices in everything, right? And
Mhm.
so some people would argue that the leadership in this situation didn't follow those best practices. And so and even though the people that go there and they sign waivers, there were some people that still, when 7 people die, people want somebody to blame.
Yeah.
And this turned into, the lead guide was vilified and scrutinized for it. The assistant guide ultimately wrote his own book that told his perspective of it. And I think that at the end of the day, that it was controversial because there was like 3 camps. There was one camp that said straight up, I'll just say it. They always dance around this when they actually say it, but there were multiple people that said that guy murdered those people. They went as far as saying that. That's how angry they were, because they thought that he had overlooked so many reasons not to go there in the so-called best practices of avalanche safety. And then the
Okay.
other group was very much in that what you're saying. Hey, you know what? This isn't entirely surprising. But the big question I always had was to have that many people taken in an avalanche. Um, I never could figure out why this one group of 21 people were hiking up this certain terrain feature
Yeah.
all together. And that was never answered by anybody. And but ultimately through my research, I came to realize what really did happen. And it's pretty dramatic and it's pretty unexpected. What I learned, and what I tell in the book, one guy who read it and actually covered the book, a reporter, a very awesome reporter, he just said, when I told him what I found out, he said, well, that changes everything. I had no idea. And this is 15 years later.
Yeah.
So again, I'm toying. I'm being protective with my research because I spent 5 years
Oh
researching
yeah, yeah.
this.
And that's why I
But
said,
but
like,
it's but
I
it's
want to lightly
no,
touch
I
on
love it.
it.
Are you? Yeah, it gives me a chance to hopefully intrigue some of your readers to go out and pick it up, because it is. I'm really proud of the research, and
Well, and one
the
more
book's
question
about to hit.
on the events of that day, because you did say there were 7 people still at the top.
Mhm.
that were, they were still in complete safety. They didn't, and I mean, obviously there were more than there were survivors. 7 people were killed, but so these people were able to, in a matter of minutes, get down to their friends, get them up to air. Was that like, I mean, was that something that people were able to do?
Well, that's part of the struggle in this snow situation. Imagine being in a river of snow, but you're going down the mountain. You're, like I said, out of control, and then eventually that river hits bottom and spreads out. But it turns. Imagine being cement and it
Yeah.
turns rock hard. I mean, that when the snow settles down there and it was anywhere from 3 feet to 15 feet deep, and through all that mess are bodies who need oxygen. And the snow is literally rock hard. Like they broke shovel blades trying to break through the surface in places.
That-
So
That's
yeah,
crazy.
that's what they were up against. Imagine that you're looking out the pool. I mean, guides, when they're guiding people around, they always count heads, just
Yeah.
like you would do with your kids at the pool or at the
Yeah.
lake, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're like, okay, I got my kids have four friends here, and all I'm doing is counting heads. One, two, three, four. And next minute, one, two, three, four. Well, imagine you're the guy that's counting 20 heads, and all of a sudden 13 of them are gone,
Yeah.
and they got minutes. They got
Yeah.
minutes, and you have to organize a rescue.
And just to further understand it, just a moment, like just to understand like how there even could be survivors. Um, so basically, once the snow takes you and you're under the snow, you have, I assume, like a certain amount of oxygen. Like you said, so you have minutes, so
Yeah.
there is some oxygen. So I guess you're basically
Yeah.
sitting
Well,
there like in almost buried in concrete with like what, like maybe 2 or 3 minutes of oxygen.
you're taught, first of all, when you're taking about avalanche, at some point you feel the acceleration slowing down, and you're taught to try and make an air pocket with your hands in front of your face if you can, to make a
Oh,
little bit of a pocket. If you're able to, and then also just to wiggle your body as best you can. Keep your arms in front of your chest, because your chest has to expand,
yeah,
right, to get air. Even if there's air, if you can't expand your lungs to get that air, and if you're caught in a snow like that, imagine, when you get your blood pressure taken at the doctor and that band constricts really tight around your upper arm.
yeah,
Imagine, and it gets to a point where it almost hurts.
yeah.
Imagine that all over every inch of your body, and you are immobilized,
That's
and you're
terrifying.
there, and you're in the dark, and
Yeah,
you basically know your life is in the people on the ground above, above to dig you out, because you cannot move. But depending on the snow, you can be let's say you're next to a really rock hard chunk of snow, and you ended up stopping where there's more porous snow and looser snow. There's more oxygen there. If you're facing up versus down. Another thing is, did you inhale snow into your mouth when you're trying to breathe? And
yeah,
now you have a plug in your throat, unable to breathe. Uh, there are a certain amount of deaths in avalanche that occur from the trauma of hitting trees or rocks on the way down, but most it's asphyxiation. And usually, if you can get somebody, I think that if you can get somebody within the first 15 minutes, it's like there is like or I believe it's like a 50% chance or something like that. Depending on the studies and where they're doing it varies. But once you get past 20 minutes, once you get to a certain point in time, I do the actual statistics in the book, but it just goes down. Every minute goes down. And there's people who, 3 minutes is kind of what you have if you're totally blocked from air, where you're not going to have brain damage or whatever. So people are madly digging, and it's chaos.
yeah.
And by talking to everybody, I tried to piece together that chaos.
Man, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but this hits bookshelves February 27th. Am I correct on that date?
27th.
But I
Yeah.
guess like if you're listening, everyone, if it's not already the 27th, uh, we'll get
It is
ready to go
available.
out on to the,
Yeah.
get ready to go out
Well,
on the 27th. Order the book online or go support your local bookstore, which I always try to encourage people to do as much as possible. And
absolutely.
but
Yeah, go out there, and you can and request a copy to be shipped in if you can. And yeah, I just Craig was such a great guy, and one thing I hope to do for his family is be able to say, hey, his story is a bestseller, and that would be amazing. It's a tough racket. There's a lot of writers who are a lot bigger than Eric Blehm out there with books that are on sale in the nonfiction category. But
Yeah.
yeah, I hope that everybody gets out and buys it. And if they think they're going to buy it in this first week or two, because then you have a better chance to hit the bestseller list. And it's just been a great journey. And I want everybody on the planet who hasn't heard of Craig Kelly to hear that name and know what a great guy he was and what he did for a sport that is now an Olympic centerpiece. And he really kind of paved the way for Shaun White and Chloe Kim and all these amazing acrobatic kids who
Yeah.
are just, blowing minds. It all kind of started with riders like Craig Kelly.
Well, I will be, man, I'm at a loss for words because I feel like I held you here so much longer than I was supposed to. I was just
Don't
saying,
worry.
just for my own, what I'm personally going to do on February 27th, I will be going and getting a copy of this book from my local bookstore, and I will be reading it, and I hope you guys do too. Uh, Eric, I appreciate so much that you taking the time to talk to me and coming on the podcast today, man.
Thanks so much. Again, it's for me, this one, it's I've try and tell story to people about people who are extraordinary and nobody's heard of them, nonfiction. And Craig really, for me, it's, takes me full circle back to my early writing career, and to the winters of my youth, if I want to sound a little bit over dramatic. And I hope that the journey is the same for the readers who will get to know somebody and a history of a sport that they probably don't know about. And yeah, I
Yeah,
think that,
yeah.
give it a shot.
And also, thanks again for letting me take you way longer than I said I would on time.
I,
And
I'm fine.
I hope you have a great day, Eric, man. I appreciate it so much.
No, I love talking about Craig and the mountains. So it's been my pleasure. Thanks, Doug.